I remember as a newly clean and sober young man in my early 30s talking over coffee to someone with long-term sobriety. Lately, I'd been spending a lot of hours drinking coffee with new friends at the local Denny's, the IHOP, and the occasional coffee house. I had heard a lot of slogans over recent months that I adopted as mantras to get me through the difficult days of early sobriety. Slogans like, "Let go and let God," and "One day at a time," and "This too shall pass." But one I was having trouble with was inscribed on the front of the medallions we were given after having achieved various milestones in our recovery. It said, "To thine own self be true." My mentor explained that the quote is a line from William Shakespeare's Hamlet. It is Polonius's last piece of advice to his son Laertes. "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man." He explained that the phrase meant to be true to yourself. Don't engage in self-deception. In short, be who you are. And that's the part that was scary to me, the be who you are part, because I had no idea who my authentic self was. I had always used drugs and alcohol to be anyone but myself. When I was nervous or scared, a glass of scotch was the cure for my perceived weakness. I had spent my life believing I didn't fit in, but I felt as if I was everyone's friend as long as I had a beer in my hand. When I looked in the mirror and didn't like who was looking back at me, I had learned to numb my feelings with a wide array of drugs and alcohol. But be who I am? Why would I want to do that? I had spent so much energy being the person others expected me to be and pretending to be the person that I wished I could be, so much of my life uncomfortable in my own skin, wearing a mask that kept anyone from seeing the scared and scarred person behind it, that I totally lost touch with who I really was. In this morning's reading, some religious folk had a problem with the people whom Jesus was spending so much time with. They were people who were comfortable in their own skin, even if that skin wasn't particularly appealing to others. In fact, the religious community felt these sinners could benefit from a spiritual makeover so that they weren't so quite in your face with their conduct. So Jesus told a story. It was a story about a young man and his journey toward his authentic self. A story about someone who, like me, had spent a lot of time trying to be just about anyone other than himself. As the story opens, he has decided that he doesn't like being stuck on the farm with his father and older brother. He's better than that, he no doubt had convinced himself. Tales of the city life were tugging on him the way the flame of a candle tugs on a moth. He saw himself as a sophisticate, and if he just had a little cash, he could fulfill his city life dreams and ambitions. So he did the unthinkable. Knowing what a pushover his father was, he asked for an advance on his inheritance. Within the Jewish culture of that day, inheritance was typically passed down after a father's death or when he could no longer manage his family's affairs. And to ask for the inheritance prematurely was not only a sign of immaturity and recklessness, but some scholars say it was thought to be disrespectful to the father, as it implied the son's wish for his death. But the father agreed. The property between the sons was divided, and giving the younger son his share. So off the younger son went, behaving much the same way any addict or alcoholic might behave. Having abandoned everything about his Jewish identity, he fully embraced the life of the Gentiles he so much admired. And he was so determined to live the good life, he managed to waste away everything that his father had given him. But when a famine swept through the land, the only job he could find was that of tending to pigs, animals that were considered to be ritually unclean. And any contact with them made a Jew ritually unclean. He may have traded in his Jewish identity for a Gentile identity, but he was no longer living the high life. When he looked in the mirror, he probably had the same opinion about himself as a drunk who wakes up in their own vomit. Still lacking any good sense about his identity, though, while remembering what a pushover his father was, he decides maybe he could move into the role of one of his father's servants. And so he gathers himself up, rehearsing his lines, and he makes his way down the road back to his childhood home. But his father has been waiting for him, and unwilling to listen to any nonsense about servanthood, he reaffirms the son as his own beloved child, lost but now found, presumed dead but alive after all. His older brother, though, like the Pharisees and scribes who felt Jesus' friends needed to clean up their act, and like many Christian extremists who feel LGBT Christians need to do the same, wasn't in favor of his father's acts of grace toward his younger brother. The only acts of grace he was in favor of were those directed towards himself. He wouldn't even use the younger brother's name, or for that matter, refer to him as his own brother, referring to him instead as this son of yours. And having already proclaimed the wayfaring young man as given up for dead and now alive, as given up for lost and now found, the father revealed the younger son's authentic identity by responding to the older brother with the words, "This brother of yours." This story is about the many identities that the younger brother has exchanged one for the other over time. He traded in his identity as a Jewish farmer for that of a Gentile socialite. Then he was reduced to the degree that he realized he was nothing but a tender of pigs, which he sought to exchange for that of a servant of his father. His older brother saw him as a manipulator, which probably has a lot of truth to it. But it wasn't until the end of the story that his authentic self is revealed as his father's son and brother to his sibling. Nothing more and nothing less. And so regardless of how you and I may have cast ourselves to be in our past, regardless of how others continue to cast us today, regardless of how low we may have hit bottom or how high we've deluded ourselves to be, I believe the message that Jesus was trying to get across to the religious community of his day is that we are all children of God and we all belong to the same family. If we can only remember to be true to ourselves, our beautifully broken selves, our scared and sacred, hurting, holy selves. if we are willing to be vulnerable enough to allow ourselves to see our weaknesses, and compassionate enough to label our broken selves as fragile, handle with care, that's the beginning of learning to love ourselves. And after looking in the mirror and still not turning away from what we see, if we can manage to extend grace to ourselves, then maybe we can do the same for others. That newly sober young man made a lot of mistakes along the way. Getting clean and sober didn't change that. But when I'm at my best, I'm able to admit those mistakes, and I try not to let them define me. When I'm at my best, I no longer try to be someone who I am not. Instead, I am who I am. And a large part of who I am is my identity as a child of God, which means there's a place that's reserved for me at God's banquet table of love, and that will never change. Amen.